Just after sunrise in a dense business district, the sidewalks are still mostly empty. Office towers rise in parallel rows, their glass surfaces reflecting pale morning light. From above, the buildings appear smooth and continuous, forming a corridor of vertical planes. At this hour, birds are already moving through the city. Many of them are not residents of the urban environment. Some are migrating between seasonal habitats, others are local birds that travel daily between feeding sites and nesting areas. Their movement through the air follows routes that existed long before the buildings appeared. Trees, rivers, coastlines, and ridgelines often guide these routes, shaping how birds travel across large distances. Cities frequently develop along those same geographic features. As a result, birds moving through these corridors encounter structures that were not part of the environment when those movement patterns formed. Glass buildings are one of the most common surfaces they meet along the way. From a human perspective, glass appears solid and clearly defined. But from the perspective of a flying bird, the surface can behave differently. Many glass panels reflect the surrounding environment. Trees, sky, clouds, and open space can appear on the surface, as if they continue beyond the building. When birds approach these reflections from a distance, the reflected image can resemble an unobstructed flight path. In those moments, the bird is not choosing between a safe route and a dangerous one. Instead, it is continuing along what appears to be a viable corridor. Bird movement is shaped by speed and efficiency. Flight consumes energy, and small birds, in particular, operate within narrow energy margins. They must maintain enough reserves for daily movement, thermoregulation, and in some cases long-distance migration. Because of this, birds rarely slow down to examine every object along their route. Their navigation relies on patterns that have historically produced successful outcomes. Open sky, gaps between vegetation, and continuous airspace. Glass reflections can replicate those patterns. A row of trees reflected across a building facade may appear to extend the landscape forward. A reflection of sky between two buildings may look like a clear passage through the corridor. From the bird's perspective, the environment appears continuous. The problem emerges at the moment when the reflection stops behaving like open space. Unlike natural obstacles such as branches or trunks, glass does not provide visual depth cues that birds typically use to judge distance. The reflected image appears at the surface itself. Until the bird is very close, the surface may remain visually indistinguishable from the reflected environment. By the time the bird perceives the boundary, the available reaction time may be too short to adjust course. Flight decisions occur within fractions of a second. Birds moving through urban corridors often maintain steady forward motion while scanning for navigation cues, food opportunities, and potential threats. Their visual system is tuned to detect movement and spatial changes across a wide field of view. But glass reflections create a stable image. The reflected environment does not move or shift in ways that signal a solid barrier. Instead, it appears consistent with the surrounding space. From a behavioral standpoint, the bird is not misinterpreting the environment in an unusual way. It is responding to cues that typically indicate safe airspace. Urban environments increase the frequency of these encounters. In natural landscapes, vertical reflective surfaces are rare. Water can reflect the sky, but birds approaching water usually adjust their movement based on other cues, such as surface texture or changing light patterns. Trees and vegetation present irregular shapes that signal physical obstacles well before a bird reaches them. Glass buildings introduce large, uninterrupted planes. These surfaces can extend across multiple floors, forming continuous reflections that stretch far above the ground. For a bird approaching at flight speed, the reflected landscape can appear stable and unobstructed until the final moment. The structure of the city also influences how birds move through these areas. Tall buildings create corridors of open air between structures. Wind patterns within these corridors can channel flight paths along predictable routes. Birds traveling through the city often follow these paths because they provide relatively clear airspace compared to dense street-level obstacles. But these same corridors also concentrate reflective surfaces. As birds move through the corridor, they encounter repeated reflections on both sides. Each surface may present a similar image of sky or vegetation, reinforcing the perception of continuous space. The risk does not come from a single decision point. Instead, it emerges from repeated exposure to visual cues that historically signaled safe movement. During migration periods, this effect becomes more pronounced. Many bird species travel at night to avoid daytime predators, and to take advantage of cooler air temperatures. They navigate using a combination of celestial cues, magnetic orientation, and large-scale landscape features. By the time morning approaches, migrating birds begin descending to find resting and feeding locations. Cities often lie along these migration routes. As daylight increases, birds moving toward lower altitudes encounter the reflective surfaces of buildings illuminated by the rising sun. At this time of day, reflections can become particularly strong. The angle of the light may cause the building to mirror the sky, or nearby vegetation with high clarity. From a distance, these reflections may appear indistinguishable from actual habitat. The bird continues along its flight path. Within the behavioral framework that guides its movement, the route remains viable. The cues ahead still resemble open airspace. Only when the bird reaches the boundary does the environment change abruptly. In many cases, collisions occur because the bird's decision process is operating exactly as it evolved to function. The behavior is efficient under most environmental conditions. It allows birds to move quickly across large areas, while conserving energy and responding to dynamic surroundings. Urban glass surfaces create a situation where those normally reliable cues produce a different outcome. Not all birds collide with glass in the same way. Some species fly higher above building level, and rarely encounter reflective facades. Others move primarily within the vertical range, where glass structures dominate the environment. Species that forage among trees or shrubs may be especially likely to approach reflections of vegetation. When the reflection resembles a continuation of habitat, the bird may attempt to reach that space. Local birds can encounter the same surfaces repeatedly. Even so, the behavior may persist, because the overall strategy of moving toward apparent habitat remains effective in most situations. Avoiding every reflective surface would require a level of inspection that would slow movement and increase energy expenditure. For birds operating under survival pressures, maintaining efficient travel often outweighs the cost of occasional risk. Urban areas introduce a concentration of reflective surfaces that did not exist in earlier environments. The behavior itself, however, remains grounded in strategies that historically supported survival. Throughout the day, birds continue to pass through these city corridors. Some travel between feeding patches, scattered across parks and tree-lined streets. Others are simply passing through on longer routes. Their movement follows the same patterns of scanning, adjusting, and maintaining forward momentum. From the perspective of the bird, the city remains a navigable space. Reflections of sky, trees, and open air still signal routes that appear viable. The underlying decision process continues to guide movement across the landscape. In the early morning corridor between the towers, flight paths pass once again through the reflected light. The environment looks open, and the birds continue moving through it.